You know, when you try to boil it down to basics, life, the universe, the economy, well, everything is nothing more than information. Information that can be reduced into the binary code of just bits. That, at least, is the premise of a book which has just won this year's prestigious Royal Society Winton Prize for Popular Science Writing. The £10,000 prize has just been won by the American science writer James Gleick. Let's go to our science editor, Tom Clarke. Tom.
John, well, this prize is awarded annually to the very best in popular science writing. That is, the most important ideas of our age explained in the most elegant way possible. It's what got me interested in science, and the same goes for many professional scientists too. The judging panel were confronted with some real heavy hitters of popular science writing on this year's shortlist, but they decided that the breadth and the sheer editorial breadth of James Gleick's book, The Information, lifted it above the others.
And then, when it was made simple, distilled, counted in bits, information was found to be everywhere. Now, even biology has become an information science, a subject of messages, instructions, and code.
What is information? Well, according to James Gleick's new book, it's pretty much everything there is. It begins as a history of man's efforts to record, store and transmit messages about what we think is important. African drums to the discovery of computing. It features such marvels as Charles Babbage's difference engine, here in all its glory at London's Science Museum. But the scope of the information is broader. Through its lens, our economy, transacted electronically, is simply information. And as Gleick explains, the on-off flip-flop of the bit may become the only way to describe the universe itself. James Gleick's 1987 book, Chaos, helped define the genre of popular science writing, as well as introduce generations of spaced-out students to the fractal and the butterfly effect. This year's shortlist for the Royal Society's Winton Prize spans cosmology, neurobiology, behaviour, genes and disease, but it was the breadth of Gleick's book that set it apart.
For instance, I hadn't thought that African drums. Well, yes, now he's pointed it out. African drums send messages across the jungle, so that's information. But that somehow hadn't been put in that class by my brain, so that was revealing. He's got this fantastic swathe of material that he pulls together, and that for me was one of the great strengths of the book.
The information ends by exploring today's world of Twitter, blogging and incessant online chatter, asking if the information deluge improves lives or whether society is falling to bits. And joining me now is the winner of this year's Royal Society Winton Book Prize, James Gleick. Congratulations. How do you feel?
Thank you. I feel surprised. I feel quite good. I hope that's plain. It's all startling. It's an honor.
Now, it's a fascinating history of our relationship with information, how we use it, how we understand it. But to look at information theory perhaps as a way of explaining everything in the universe, even us, is it not a kind of fairly cold way of looking at the world? Does it leave much room for meaning?
There is something cold about it. The original idea of information theory very explicitly subtracted meaning from the equation so that scientists could treat information as their business, as something they could mathematicize. And information without meaning, well, that's all too familiar to us today, isn't it? I mean, we know that we're surrounded by a greater plenitude of information than our ancestors could have dreamed of, and yet we don't necessarily feel particularly wise about it.
And doesn't that point to one of the more frightening areas that you explore in the book, which is this idea of overload? And in this era of Twitter and of blogging and of incessant digital chatter, we're losing track of what's really valuable in information.
Well, that's the paradox that we should cherish this stuff, value it so highly, and yet be able to worry about having too much of it. Well, it's sort of weird. It's like having too much ready access to food or sex, you know. Information is the stuff of life, and yet having too much of it seems to make us anxious. It may even confuse us.
And what about the idea that information theory itself can explain who we are and what our universe is?
No,
Do you think we're ready for that? Is that what you're trying to suggest?
I'm not saying that. Information theory, though, was a very exciting piece of science that developed in the middle of the last century, and it was by no coincidence, its evolution coincided with the birth of the computer era. It made all of this stuff possible around us.
And I'm going to have to interrupt you there because the information age has caught up with us. We need to go back. John,